We've all been in dangerous and risky situations in our lives, or we've all done something that might have been dangerous or risky. But instead of using the word dangerous or the word risky, aren't there any alternatives or aren't there any other ways of doing so or saying so? Well, the answer to the question is a big yes, which is why you're watching today's video. In today's video, I will be providing you with alternatives to anything that you want to describe risky or dangerous. So let's get started. The first phrase that you can use instead of saying something is dangerous or something is risky is something is like playing with fire. Something is like playing with fire. Something is like playing with fire. What happens when you play with fire? Obviously, you catch fire when you play with fire. You start burning. It burns your body. It does harm to you. It injures you. It does something dangerous to you. So when we describe something as playing with fire, what we mean is something is dangerous or risky. An example of this phrase: ignoring safety while handling explosives is like playing with fire. Ignoring safety while handling explosives is like playing with fire, which means working with explosives or handling explosives and not taking safety into account is something very dangerous and risky that you're doing. Is like playing with fire. The next phrase is something is like asking for trouble. Something is like asking for trouble. Something is like asking for trouble. When we describe something as asking for trouble, what we mean is something is dangerous and risky and you should not consider doing it. Why? Because it will get you into trouble, it will do harm to you, and it will pose a threat to you. So forget about doing it. Don't think about doing it. It's like asking for trouble. By doing it, you're getting yourself into trouble. It is risky and dangerous. Don't even think about doing it. An example of this phrase: leaving your car unlocked in a high-crime area is like asking for trouble. Leaving your car unlocked in a high-crime area is like asking for trouble. Leaving your car unlocked in a high-crime area is like asking for trouble, which means leaving your car unlocked in an area in which the rate of crime is high is something risky and dangerous to do, is nothing short of getting yourself into trouble. By doing so, you will have your car stolen by the thieves. So you should not consider doing it because it's risky and dangerous. By doing so, you're only posing or presenting a threat to yourself or your assets, your vehicle, your car. You may have your car stolen by leaving your car unlocked in a high crime area, in an area in which the rate of crime is high. That's like playing with fire. That's like getting yourself into trouble. That's like asking for trouble. The next phrase that we can use to say that you're doing something risky or dangerous is something is like dicing with death. Something is like dicing with death. Something is like dicing with death. When we say something is like dicing with death, what we mean is something is risky and dangerous to do. Something is not what you should consider doing because it might get you into trouble. Doing something is not recommended at all because it's full of risks and a lot of potential dangers, so you should not consider doing it. Something is like dicing with death. Something is like asking for trouble. Something is like getting yourself into trouble. Something is like playing with fire. An example of this: driving at high speeds on icy roads without seatbelts is like dicing with death. Driving at high speeds on icy roads without seatbelts is like dicing with death, is like harming yourself, is like doing damage to your car, is like posing a threat not only to your vehicle but also to something more important than your vehicle, which is your life. Is like getting yourself into trouble, asking for trouble, playing with fire, is like committing suicide, is nothing short of doing something that might lead to your death, that might lead to one of the biggest or one of the most irreversible losses in your life, which is the loss of your life, your death. So driving at high speeds on icy roads without seatbelts is like dicing with death. The next phrase is something is a recipe for disaster. Something is a recipe for disaster. Something is a recipe for disaster. When we say something is a recipe for disaster, what we mean is something is risky, is dangerous to do, something will lead to a disaster, something will get you into trouble, something is asking for trouble, is playing with fire, is dicing with death, is like doing something that will eventually end up doing damage to something or doing harm to you, or getting you into trouble, putting you in danger, or putting you at risk of something. An example of this: planning a wedding outdoors without a backup plan for bad weather is a recipe for disaster. Planning a wedding outdoors without a backup plan for bad weather is a recipe for disaster. Planning a wedding outdoors without a backup for bad weather is a recipe for disasters, meaning that when you plan a wedding outdoors without any backup plan for, bad weather, is a recipe for disaster, is playing with fire, is asking for trouble, is, getting yourself into trouble, is doing something that will end up putting you in danger or at risk of something unpleasant, is like, committing suicide is obviously something that, will do damage to something, or is something that will endanger you, is something that will get you into trouble. The next phrase that we can use to describe a dangerous or risky situation is something is like walking on thin ice. Something is like walking on thin ice. Something is like walking on thin ice. Something is like walking on thin ice, which means something is dangerous, risky. Something poses or presents a threat to you. Something puts you in danger. Something puts you at risk. Something gets you into trouble. Something's like playing with fire, is like asking for trouble, is like dicing with death, right? Is a recipe for disaster. An example of this phrase: criticizing your boss in a team meeting is like walking on thin ice. Criticizing your boss in a team meeting is like walking on thin ice. Criticizing your boss in a team meeting is like walking on thin ice, which means criticizing your boss in front of everyone in a team meeting is like playing with fire, is like committing suicide, is like doing something that poses a threat to you, is like asking for trouble, is like dicing with death, is getting yourself into trouble, is like putting yourself in danger of getting fired by your boss immediately after criticizing him in a team meeting. Now we get to the next phrase that we can use to describe something dangerous or risky, or a risky or dangerous situation, which is something is a ticking time bomb. 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 When we say something is a ticking time bomb, what we mean is something is risky and dangerous to do. Something gets you into trouble. Something poses a threat to you. Something is like playing with fire, is like asking for trouble. An example of this: ignoring the financial problems in the company is like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Ignoring the financial problems in the company is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Ignoring the financial problems in the company is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode, which means ignoring the financial problems in the company is like playing with fire, is like asking for trouble, is like dicing with death, is like a recipe for disaster, is getting the company into trouble, is posing a threat to the company, is putting the company in danger or at risk of collapsing or bankruptcy. Proceeding to the next phrase, used to describe something dangerous or risky, or a risky or dangerous situation. Something is like walking into the lion's den. Something is like walking into the lion's den. What happens when you go inside the lion's den, guys? What happens when you go inside a cage in which there is a lion? The lion attacks you, bites you, or might even kill you, might skin you alive and kill you, might swallow you, at a gulp, might eat you completely. So when we describe something as walking into a lion's den, what we mean is something is like asking for trouble, is like playing with fire, is like getting yourself into trouble, is like walking on thin ice, is like, I don't know, a recipe for disaster, is posing or presenting a threat to yourself. An example of this: getting into a fight with armed criminals is like walking into the lion's den. Getting into a fight with armed criminals is like walking into the lion's den. Getting into a fight with armed criminals is like walking into the lion's den, which means getting into a fight with armed criminals is like playing with fire, is like asking for trouble, is like walking on thin ice, is a recipe for disaster, is like getting yourself into trouble, is like doing something that poses or presents a threat to yourself, is like putting yourself in danger or at risk of, I don't know, losing your life, or doing something that will end up doing a lot of harm to you, doing a significant amount of harm to you. Move into the next phrase that you can use to describe a risky or dangerous situation, which is something is like cutting your own throat. Something is like cutting your own throat. Something is like cutting your own throat. When you do something that is like cutting your own throat, you do something risky or dangerous that poses a threat to yourself first, that gets you into trouble, that does harm to you or presents a threat to you. So when something is like cutting your own throat, it is like playing with fire. It is like getting yourself into trouble. It's like asking for trouble. It's like dicing with death. It's like walking on thin ice. It's like walking into the lion's den. An example of this: disrespecting your clients is like cutting your own throat professionally. Disrespecting your clients is like cutting your own throat professionally. Disrespecting your clients is like cutting your own throat professionally. Disrespecting your clients is like cutting your own throat professionally, which means disrespecting your clients, talking rudely to your clients, is nothing short of playing with fire, asking for trouble, walking into the lion's den, I don't know, walking on thin ice, is a risky thing to do because you will end up losing your clients, you will end up making no money, you will end up having your company go bankrupt. Now we get to the next phrase that we can use to emphasize how risky or dangerous something or a situation is, which is something is like digging your own grave. Something is like digging your own grave. Something is like digging your own grave. When something is like digging your own grave, it is so risky and dangerous to do that will end up doing harm to you. They will end up getting you into trouble. They will end up causing you trouble. An example of this: lying to your boss about your mistakes is like digging your own grave. Lying to your boss about your mistakes is like digging your own grave. Lying to your boss about your mistakes is like digging your own grave. Which means by lying to your boss about the mistakes that you've made, what you're doing is nothing short of cutting your own throat, getting yourself into trouble, putting yourself in danger or at risk of getting fired or losing your job, or is like walking into the lion's den, is like, I don't know, playing with fire, is asking for trouble, is walking on thin ice, is something that will eventually pose a threat to your professional life or will pose a threat to your job, your career. And finally, we get to the 10th idiomatic expression that you can use to emphasize how risky or dangerous something is, which is something is like adding fuel to the fire. Something is like adding fuel to the fire. Something is like adding fuel to the fire. When something is described as being like adding fuel to the fire, what we mean is something is so risky and dangerous to do because it makes a situation worse. It makes a situation deteriorate into something much worse, or it exacerbates a situation. So when something is like adding fuel to the fire, it is risky and dangerous to do because it makes a situation worse. Or it is like playing with fire. It's like walking on thin ice. It's like asking for trouble or getting yourself into trouble. An example of this: arguing with someone who's already angry is like adding fuel to the fire. Arguing with someone who's already angry is like adding fuel to the fire. Arguing with someone who's already angry is like adding fuel to the fire, which means arguing with someone who's already angry is like doing something that makes a situation much worse, doing something that exacerbates a situation further, doing something that makes a situation go from bad to worse and poses more threats to the situation. And that's about all, guys. In today's video, you learned 10 beautiful English phrases and idioms that you can use to emphasize how risky and dangerous something is. Let's review all these phrases once again together. Something is like playing with fire. Something is like playing with fire. Something is like playing with fire. Something is like asking for trouble. Something is like asking for trouble. Something is like asking for trouble. Something is like dicing with death. Something is like dicing with death. Something is like dicing with death. Something is a recipe for disaster. Something is a recipe for disaster. Something is a recipe for disaster. Something is like walking on thin ice. Something is like walking on thin ice. Something is like walking on thin ice. Something is like a ticking time bomb. Something is like a ticking time bomb. Something is like a ticking time bomb. Something is like walking into the lion's den. Something is like walking into the lion's den. Something is like walking into the lion's den. Something is like cutting your own throat. Something is like cutting your own throat. Something is like cutting your own throat. Something is like digging your own grave. Something is like digging your own grave. Something is like digging your own grave. Something is like adding fuel to the fire. Something is like adding fuel to the fire. Something is like adding fuel to the fire. And that's about all, guys. Thank you for watching today's video. Make sure you like this video in support of this channel. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. I'll be back soon.